that is basically some sort of mix of regulations and governance. In some cases, if we look at the idea of this effect and this one road, one belt idea, this is all about the influencing the governance and the regulation of the other countries through providing some sort of technical and aid support. Apart from this, if we look into our own dynamics, that there are big telecom, those are working in our country, like they have a huge land and they are maintaining their own small cities. They are bringing the large scale, they are bringing the idea, the laws of the country, but within that community they have their own rules and regulations. So in this idea, we cannot entirely reject this idea. This is already working in almost every country. So with this brief introduction, I will hand over to Dr. Naveed to give a brief presentation that will be followed by some sort of interactive discussion between.
Thank you. I don't know if this will be a brief presentation or a long one. So we intend to prolong presentation, so that's why I can't commit whether I will do it briefly. So 15 minutes. Okay. So I just need that slide mover, I think. Is it working now? So what I want to share with you, this idea of charter cities was popularized by Paul Romer, and I think somewhere around 2007-8 he started talking about charter cities, and for 5 to 7 years he made so many TED talks, brief papers, working papers, and he also wrote on his website about this idea. And this was the time that the way Paul Romer perceives it. He said that he was obviously, we all know that he was interested in economic growth, and this was the main motivation that he started looking into cities. That cities are actually the vehicles to promote economic growth. Whatever he talked about research and development, ideas, cities actually help to generate ideas and research and development, and they also help to diffuse ideas. So that was the reason that he started looking into importance of cities to promote economic growth. And with that idea, so what actually he was trying to do, that because within cities, what is most important thing? And to Paul Romer, these were actually rules with which we try to govern our cities. And his main premise was that urbanization is a powerful tool, and developing countries are actually unable to exploit this potential, and part of the reason is that they cannot come up with rules which are trustworthy, and they cannot come up with institutions which can help them generate economic growth. So his idea was that if cities are lacking, if developing countries are lacking governance system, then what they need to do actually, they need to collaborate with foreign governments or private sector to establish rules which are different than their existing rules and frameworks. And why he said that these rules should be different, his idea was that if you try to change rules or governance system in existing cities, then you can't do it. Because people who are already living in these places, like if we want to have high-rise growth, we think that high-rise growth is good, and people who love to live in big houses, they will not let us change that sort of land zoning. So similar sort of things were actually restrictions, and he came up with this idea that we need to come up with new cities, and those new cities where we can create rules before moving people to that place, so that whenever people are coming to those cities, they know that this is the set of rules that they need to follow, and so they will not have any resistance. So that was the basic premise on which he built this idea of charter cities. And other than charter cities, where he actually tried to sort of generate where he tried to draw this idea of charter cities, mainly he again and again mentions Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And he came up with the idea that the governance system in Hong Kong was different than mainland China. And so that helped Hong Kong to attract foreign direct investment, and that helped Hong Kong, they were the same people who were living in mainland China, and the people were same living in Hong Kong actually. The only thing was that this governance system was different than mainland China. And the second thing that he builds on is the Shenzhen one. So we'll talk more about it, that how this idea of Hong Kong and Shenzhen is not a good example of charter city that he himself presented. So with that, in this presentation I'll skip, I've already given some background, but just the first thing that I've already mentioned, that Paul Romer was interested and he realized that cities are engines of growth. And I've already mentioned that why he thought that there is a need of new economic cities. He thought that we'll remain unable to change rules and governance system in existing cities. So we need to bypass those existing systems and we need to come up with a new governance system to experiment in new cities. And then the main idea was that just like if we have if we need some goods and services, so this governance is also a service. If a country has a deficit in governance, and then they are unable to develop rules which are trustworthy, which are credible, which are efficient, so then what they can do, they can collaborate with other governments or other institutions who can come up and who can present these rules to them. So the goal of a charter city is reform, not giving out concessions. So what he tried to do in his many talks, he tried to differentiate a charter city from special economic zones. And he thought that special economic zones are generally meant for giving concessions, they are not meant for introducing reforms. But his idea of a charter city was a laboratory for a reform experimentation. That if something worked in one city, we can learn and we can replicate the same thing in another city. So he came up with the 4 things. The first one was that city should be large enough. The second thing was that institutional rules should be specified in advance so that people before moving, so that they don't resist them whatever they've already decided. So when people are not there, then you can come up with an ideal system because there is no resistance. So that's what his premise was. The third thing was there should be no restriction on the freedom of all residents. And the fourth thing was all institutional rules should apply equally to all residents. So with these main tenets, I think the 2 most interesting precedents for charter cities are Hong Kong and Shenzhen. So it does have some origins here. They each played important roles in fostering reforms of the Chinese economy. So that's the premise on which he built charter city. We'll look into it later on that in this presentation whether his premise is right or questionable in a way. But that his premise is based mainly on Shenzhen and Hong Kong. So what is the premise, or what is the some implicit sort of a thinking behind this new economic cities or even a charter city, that it is possible through planning experts to engineer an equitable, prosperous and amicable society capable of solving urban problems. So it means that if a few people sit together, they will be in a position to devise something that can solve urban problems. So who are those people? Those can be economists, planners, businessmen. They sit together and few of them actually can devise a system that will work very well. So this is just the confidence, he himself has been remained, more sort of economist who believed in open economy. But later on cities, he actually converts to more planning. And he wrote in many places, Manhattan didn't evolve itself actually. There was someone on the back of Manhattan who developed Manhattan. Similarly, in every city, in Shenzhen actually, Shenzhen didn't evolve itself actually. It was Deng who pioneered, who crafted the architecture and everything for Shenzhen. So he has converged toward planning things. So I'll talk some of these things that what we try to look into it. We try to charter city real world application and the empirical foundation that he tried to draw from precedent cities of Shenzhen and Hong Kong and some theoretical foundations as well. So if we critically analyze the first biggest critique on this whole concept of charter cities is that that Shenzhen and Hong Kong, the way he considered them charter cities, they are not that sort of charter cities. Hong Kong was essentially a colony of British, and it was not a voluntary arrangement between China and Hong Kong. So with that sort of thing, we can say that this is the criticism on this model of charter city is that we are presenting the colonialism in a different way actually. But Paul Romer actually responds to this criticism that this is not involuntary. This is the voluntary arrangement. But we need to look into history of colonialism and the way these colonists actually captured many of the lands and the countries. They started through voluntary arrangements of trade and many such aspects. So Hong Kong's being a colony, and then advocating it as an example for a charter city, this is in itself of flaw in this concept. And the second thing that what we discussed about Shenzhen actually. So China never outsourced governance of Shenzhen to any other country. What they did, this was a new city. They experimented economic reforms and a new governance system like in China. This Communist Party nominates everywhere, but in Shenzhen, two-way election was allowed. This was the first city. So they tried to come up with a different model for Shenzhen. So the way he describes charter cities, these two cities do not actually fulfill that criteria of charter cities, but he keeps mentioning that because this is success, now we need to move towards charter cities. So this is some inherent flaw in this idea that many people has written about. So another thing very important for new economic cities, there is a huge upfront cost involved in creating new cities. And there is no guarantee that every new city is going to succeed. So if we look around the world, there are so many examples where cities failed and succeeded. And for developing countries, that cost is so huge that we also need to look into that if we go for this sort of a startup city. And then the very interesting example is what Paul Romer was involved in 2009, and this was in Honduras. So what they did actually, they were inspired with this idea of Paul Romer, and they invited Romer in Honduras. Rather the first time met in Miami, I think. So they tried to create a charter city in Honduras. The parliament passed the legislation and they gave an autonomous status to this region. There was a transparency commission, and Paul Romer was also member of that transparency commission. But what happened later on, actually, this model miserably failed in a number of ways. There was a lot of resistance among people that we are actually outsourcing our sovereignty, and then there were human rights issues and people objected to that idea. And finally, what happened actually in 2012, the Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional. So even before 2012, Paul Romer had distanced himself from this idea, and he realized this is not going to be implemented. So this is the biggest thing, that practicality of this idea, that how difficult it is to implement even a small country like Honduras. And if you talk about the country like Pakistan, where we don't have that much homogeneous population, and we have our own ethnic and other issues in our countries, and coming up with an idea that we can outsource something and this is a simplistic arrangement, that is in itself a questionable thing. So this is, in short, this is a simplistic and a fuzzy concept that we try to explain it. So there are many alternative thoughts that while being contained in the host country, the governance system, another thought is that the system should remain under the constitution. It should not be outside the constitution. So what the idea originally was, that this should be something within the host country, but the host country's laws, rules, regulations will not apply on it. So many people have argued that, okay, this is fine to have a new city, new governance system, but it should remain under the same constitutional system. So the host country grants an exclusively high-level autonomy to city managers and global expect, even if policy targets are met, such new cities may fail to attract people. So अगर आप ये सारा कुछ कर भी दें, even if you do everything, even there is a no guarantee that with good rules that city is going to succeed. This is much more complex than the way Paul Romer tried to explain it. So with this city's failure, so I just tried to, this was the heading of LA Times, skyscrapers check, parks check, people still needed. And they are still needed in Songdo. So Songdo is a new city in the ancient zone of Korea, which they tried to develop. And so you can see that this is a nice city. So if you can recognize this musician, can you? The one who is there? Huh? This is me. Okay. So people are paying attention to, people are listening to what I'm doing. So I visited Songdo just to see that this is, they say that this is city of the future. Yes, this is still city of the future, because people don't want to live there actually. So again, this is a beautiful city. There is a stream, there are high rises. What Nadeem Saab likes actually, if there will be high rises, there will be economic growth. So they have high rises, they have streams, they have public spaces. public places, but this is not organic growth. This is something that we are trying to transplant something into another organism. So similarly, everything is quite nice, it looks nice, but people are still not preferring to live in this city. So I would suggest that people who are fond of reading new cities, this is a nice book that I'm fond of, James Scott's book, and how certain schemes to improve the human conditions have failed actually. And he has also discussed this upfront planning of the cities and the way we try to consider cities, something that's an engineering planning sort of thing. So that's a nice book to understand it. So there are so many other examples. Ancient relatively was a new city that sold, built and relatively did well. Dubai within DIFC. So we discussed all these models in our working paper as well. And relatively DIFC obviously is considered a success story, but this is backed by debt and the model is very different. And then Cyberjaya in Malaysia, they also tried to create this new city with a fancy, slogans and new buildings and all these sort of narratives, but they miserably failed. And then Indian city where they tried to go for private sector like growth, relatively they've done better. But one thing is very important in these new cities, particularly when we take example of China, that is actually the authoritative state. If you have an authoritative state, then these things are relatively easier. If you have, ethnic, political, regional diversity, then it becomes very difficult for any country to implement such models. So I'll just try to conclude that there are flaws in conception. The way we described that, it was based on mainly on Shenzhen and Hong Kong, and both of these examples do not fulfill the criteria of charter city itself. And then there are real world applications that they tried to do in Honduras. They also miserably failed in that real world application. And but what is actually plan and reform are key ingredients, and if governments can offer the visible hand required, a foreign team of experts. So William Easterly put it actually very nicely about this idea that he said that it's a mixture of great creativity and great naivety actually. So this is sort of a simplistic arrangement, and new economic city is too simplistic a phenomenon that can easily be dealt with by importing institutions. So cities are complex organisms, and this is actually a very economist way of dealing with a problem, is try to forget there is a problem, and then you come up with a solution, something that may not relate to that problem actually. So the idea and the solution is, how can we govern cities collectively? How can we overcome problems in our cities? How can we engage people? So instead of engaging people, he said it's a very difficult thing to engage existing people. And he was scared from, advocating some new rules to existing people. And he said, okay, we'll go to some place, this is just like something like, let's assume. And he assumed that there are no people and then we can create any rules. But that's not the case. This is not just about land actually. It's more about the country's constitution, priorities, aspirations, and engaging people is the key, in city governance. And cities are complex and are shaped by interdisciplinary and multidimensional perspectives, such as the role of the state, marking society, and geospatial factors. So this is not just about simplifying it in terms of rules and someone can come up with this idea. So new economic cities may or may not achieve the goals depending on its geography, city governance, investment by national and foreign companies. So there is no guarantee actually. So it really depends. When we take the example of Shenzhen, so had there not been Hong Kong closer to Shenzhen, Shenzhen would have not been, achieved that sort of success. So this we need to consider in our mind when we think about new cities, that what is the geography of that city where we are talking about. And sovereignty of nations while encouraging experimentation for economic reforms and urban governance system. Like I'll just give you one example, that when we are working on Gwadar, so Gwadar people often say that we need to come up with an arrangement that is special administrative arrangement under the federal government. So I've been giving talks on Gwadar as well, and I always came up with a resistance to this idea that, considering Balochistan circumstances, we should not even talk about something that federal government is going to, have that direct control on. Even if there is some special administrative arrangement, it should be under the government of Balochistan. So this is something that sovereignty and the local geographic sensitivities are so important that instead of going to these fancy ideas, we need to realize how can we contextualize it. Yes, we need a different reform system, we need a different governance system for Gwadar to make it a successful economic city, but we also need to be cognizant of regional and issues that we have in Balochistan. And the last one, initiatives like can only work if administrative mechanism successfully prevents destructive rent-seeking behavior by government authorities as well as businesses. So if SECs are also a way to promote this sort of rent-seeking, then obviously we should not expect much from special economic zones. So this charter city is not directly related to SECs, but some of these concepts are interrelated. Charter cities, new economic city, master planned new cities, and special economic zones. So that's why in this working paper we've tried to discuss some of these concepts and the way we've tried to come up with a critique of charter cities. So this is basically the crux is, it's a critique of charter cities idea, and how can we learn some of these lessons and how can we incorporate in our context as well. So thank you very much. So this is the TED talk. If you will be interested, this is the way he explains this idea of charter cities.
Naveed, thank you so much for giving a very detailed presentation on this idea of charter city. To me, if we look at the idea of this charter city, it's all about reforming the institutions. So to me, they look into the way how they can reform the institution, but as we cannot reform institution with the existing structure. So I think when I was thinking about that, you will look into these aspects. You will have to look into the idea of this reforming institution, and critique should be on how we can, if this idea of charter didn't work, and we say that it's a very badly conceived idea, then what would be the alternative? So the alternative that you are proposing is, I think, totally misleading this concept of charter city to me, but the forum is open to have some sort of discussion. And I have a very basic question. If we have to improve our institutions and try that the one way is to create a competition within the society, and they gave an idea, if you create an ideal example, and that can be replicated to the other, and other can be induced to do some type of reforms to come up with some sort of and like a prosperous city. So the idea basically lies in these lines. So the forum is open for questions, and we will take 2 questions, then ask Naveed to reply, then we will have another round of questions.
Where are the other 2 authors?
The one is in China, and she is associate professor at State University New York, Blacksburg campus. And the third one is, second one is assistant professor at NUST. So she is supervising a student, and actually she had to attend that dissertation defense of her student. So that's the reason she couldn't attend.
Another question? Naveed?
Thank you for a very good presentation. Maybe a naive, because this is not my core area. But in public finance, we teach our students about a time-out model, in which the people vote by walk-in. So don't you think that it's a kind of an innovation in that sense that we have cities developed? Maybe it's kind of an infancy time, but if we have more cities competing with each other and then people moving around, maybe it's too early to comment about what sort of outcomes it will.
Fine. For Romer, basically, in his talk in subcontinent, basically mentioned it that he will not go for charter cities in subcontinent because it already led to colonization due to East India Company story. So basically, you see, cities are at third tier of the government. In a country like Pakistan, we have resources with the federal government, and then some are transferred to the provincial government, and city basically has government has hardly any power in it. How can we have basically this autonomous, completely this charter type city and a fully autonomous city? How can we have arrangement somewhere in the middle? Like Gwadar, I agree with you that you must see society and government, and then you have to move in some narrow corridor to find out what is the optimal solution. So how do you see this, that fully autonomous and charter sit somewhere in between this? How can we have this sort of arrangement to make our cities more viable, sustainable, and you see economic, Indian economic?
So I'll start with Nasir's question, and I'll also clarify that in this working paper we didn't relate it much with Pakistan. Actually, this was just a generic critique of Paul Romer's idea, and many of the questions are coming very specific to Pakistan. So there are some lessons that we can draw from it, but obviously for our working paper we didn't talk much about its relevance in Pakistan. But this is part of my other work that I'm working on Gavadar's governance, so that's how I relate it. So that is one aspect that we with the Pakistan relationship. The first question was on competition. There is no doubt that cities need to compete with each other, and that competition helps in a long way. But to what extent we think that cities should be autonomous, independent, and everything, that's a question that every society has been dealing with. Like in London, the way in the UK, the way the federal government intervenes in policing matters, in everything, that's different than the way the US does with cities. And the Home Department in the UK, centrally, it's a very recent thing that London started its own metropolitan police. Otherwise, everything was with the federal government. And the commissioner, the mayor of London, his main function right now is the transportation. Education, health is the national system. But in the US, the model is different. And then there is some criticism on that model as well. The way it has created inequalities within the US. And there is this cities competition is the famous hypothesis of Charles Tibbott. That's called Tibbott hypothesis. And the idea was that if cities compete with each other, we'll have more efficiency. So it worked well for some time, but we know that the schooling system, the local revenues, all depends on property values. And what has been happening over the time, this is the segregation that happened in various cities. The city that started success created more success. And once a city started failing, then the failure created more failures. And that inequality is also something. So cities are governed collectively. So that is not something that the federal government or the provincial government can't do anything. They have a role. But in our system, this is on the other end of the spectrum. So here actually federal government earlier and no provincial governments, they are playing every shot in cities. So we are actually on the one extreme of the spectrum, the US may be on the other extreme of the spectrum. So somewhere we need to create this balance, and rightly so you pointed out that we do need autonomous cities where cities can function. Yesterday someone was telling me that, Nasir sir, you can correct me, Pindi, I met the Rawalpindi Development Authority, and I was asking them about land zoning, and they said that is the subject of housing department, not the Rawalpindi Development Authority. So housing department actually does this land zoning for Rawalpindi, and that housing department of government of Punjab. I always thought that, and they said no, LDA is different than RDA. LDA has its own legislation, but Rawalpindi Development Authority doesn't. All these other authorities are not established like LDA. Approval provincial government. So, but this is not something that कि अगर आप रावलपिंडी में बैठे हुए हैं और आपकी जोनिंग जो है वो जाके लाहौर में एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन जो है वो अप्रूव कर रही है. So we need to move towards the model where we can create autonomous cities, we can create so ये जो new local government ordinance है इसमें it's a good step in a way. They have 9 metropolitan corporations, लेकिन उसके बाद जो उन्होंने उसके ऊपर surveillance बिठाई हुई है bureaucratic organization की, that's still questionable. इसी तरह एक्साइज और प्रॉपर्टी का जो टैक्स है, दिस इज स्टिल प्रोविंशियल गवर्नमेंट जो है वो उसको एक्साइज डिपार्टमेंट कलेक्ट कर रहा है ना, सिर्फ
कलेक्शन एक्साइज डिपार्टमेंट,
कलेक्शन एक्साइज का
लेवी बाय लोकल गवर्नमेंट,
लेवी बाय लोकल कलेक्शन वो
बाय लोकल गवर्नमेंट.
तो वो दिस इज समथिंग दैट वेयर वी नीड टू हैव कि हम कैसे लोकल लेवल पे वी कैन डू पार्टिसिपेटरी गवर्नेंस, वी कैन डू कंसल्टेशंस, वी कैन अंडरस्टैंड आवर नीड्स एंड वी कैन रिस्पॉन्ड टू दीस थिंग्स. So there is no doubt in that thing that we need to move towards cities जिनकी governance independent हो और जहाँ पर professional capability भी हो. अभी भी आप city governments में चले जाएं, and Rawalpindi Development Authority से भी I asked this question and even LDA as well. कि आप मुझे ये बताएं कि आज से 20 से 25 साल पहले लाहौर में क्या businesses register हो रहे थे और आज क्या हो रहे हैं? They said we don't know. And I then asked them, how can you plan for your cities? How can you do anything in your city? You don't have even this basic understanding. And part of the reason is they said we don't have that capacity. I don't know that what does that capacity mean.
So we will take 2 or 3 more questions. Okay, then that's all. Mike?
Well, my feeling is that rubber is just being American. You know, Pilgrim fathers go to United States. There are no people there, and if there are some, they just get rid of them. So they only want to recreate America. Having said that, the point he's making needs to be understood. He says where there are people, there will be resistance. So the question really for us to consider is how to overcome that resistance. I mean, you talked about UK. UK is not a federation, but USA. We are a federation of a very different kind. You see, we have provinces which are ethnic. That is not the case in American states. So we have to be even more careful. And just look at our history. It took decades for federal government to give provinces their powers back. And now we fear that it might take decades for provinces to move on further. And if we look back, there were things that provinces gave to the new central government, and the federal government took a lot of time giving it back. Like sales tax was basically a provincial tax. It was given to the poor federal government in those days. But now federal government is very touchy about it. I think we need to have a very clear system. The federal government can run on direct taxes, and the provincial governments can run on indirect taxes, GST and so on. The local government need to have full power to tax property. Property tax everywhere in the world is second or third highest. But we actually don't have much by way of revenue in property taxes. And whatever we have a very complex system in which provincial government sort of takes its own share. So we need clarity here that property taxes should be fully with the cities and whatever there is at local level, and these finance commissions and so on may deal with other taxes, but each level of government must have one major tax clearly. Only then it can work.
Very interesting subject, Rover, and what you told us about him. But you missed out a few things. You mentioned Honduras. You didn't mention Guantanamo Bay. And you didn't mention Madagascar. He proposed Canada should take out Guantanamo Bay. And this is part of this imperial mindset which you pointed out, that our rules, our laws will apply there, just let us have this land of charter. Same thing happened with Madagascar. In fact, the poor president was thrown out. He had agreed more or less. You mentioned Easterly, but you didn't mention Epole. He said he has good ideas, but he also had ended up being very crazy in the last few years. So this is part of his crazy ideas.
He has always been crazy. Naveed Saab can,
Okay.
tell us more.
Shenzhen. Shenzhen is something unique. It's not like a charter city you pointed out. Certainly not like Hong Kong. And proximity to Hong Kong had nothing to do with it.
It went back to Deng Xiaoping and they picked the winners for industrialization, and then they invited multinationals to come and set up shop there and do the work there. And they provided the manpower. It was very special incentive to those who worked there, including you could build a house. A foreigner came and went there, lived there, and within 3 years, you could pay back for it. The other thing is, everyone tries to plan cities. The overall unplanned nature of Mohenjo-daro or Karachi or Lahore is no longer there. Islamabad was also a planned city, but it was meant to keep businesses out. Just a government setup. Grown differently, almost size here. I mean, set up an industrial area. And industry doesn't happen there, but just some other things. By the way, marble fireplaces from the I-10 area, I-9, are exported to USA. So complete fireplaces. Playing catch-up involves you cannot replicate what has gone before. You got to make your own music, dance to your own music, make some good orchestration. And now something new is coming up, new, let's say, maestro is emerging on the scene. And I wish you had mentioned that, because this ties up with Rober's thesis of the Charter City, the new East India Company. You read about it. And they have also come to Pakistan. February of last year, there was a small item, but this big in the news. Two solar plants, 50 megawatts each, are being set up in Waziristan, Saudi investment. And then they had a couple of companies who were their security people. One of them was FSG, Eric Prince, who's been lobbying very hard in writing and verbally with the government there, and in Afghanistan. This explains a lot of other things. For a new East India Company type model, come and do businesses, I was going to say, in our country. But Romer has other things. And this is part of what I call the economist's dilemma. You have to go back decades and look at the trends, and then try and analyze what happened. It doesn't always happen like that. There are spikes and there are discontinuities, and funny things can happen. Like you.
One more question.
I think this has turned into a Romer bashing session, so I have to come out slightly different. I think we are being a little harsh on Romer.
Only in the Charter City, but otherwise these are very interesting points to make.
Yeah, on Charter City, I think we are coming out a little harsh on him. I don't think he meant it in the strict way that you guys are interpreting it. I don't think it's a desire to transplant institutions. It's basically another way of saying special economic zones. Basically what Shenzhen defined as special economic zones with special rules, with even migration laws. For example, not everybody will come to Shenzhen. There was a special way of getting to Shenzhen. And I think DRC is a very good example. DRC set up a separate, totally separate legal system within Dubai, and which is operating very well, and has served within a space of 4 or 5 acres, which has set up a whole new system by which people operate, and has allowed a large number of international financial companies to come and set up their headquarters. So it worked very well for about 20 years. Now there are other reasons that Dubai is almost overbuilt, etc. They're separate. I think what Robert is saying basically is that, hey, we are so confused in old rules, and that it's taken us 70 years, we haven't gotten rid of colonialism. We are stuck in the past, something that, as lobbyists have talked about too. Somehow we can't seem to shed the past. It's past dependence in a high order. And so to get past by a past dependence, you have to have islands where you could possibly do something like water. In a sense, we have handed water over to the Chinese. And we have a separate regime emerging in water. Chinese have even asked us to use Chinese currency in water. And though we have resisted it, but we may do it. At the same time, for example, take Ecuador or Garge or something. We have actually granted our sovereignty to the World Bank. I mean, it is a fact that we have signed these treaties which now place our Supreme Court below the World Bank. So whether we like it or not, sovereignty is gone. the essential issue is that we don't understand these things, we sign them away. People still don't know what happened in Liquidate, but we are paying $6 billion. We're going to give the money to Liquidate. So in one sense, Roma is right that if we could define, and we are struggling with SDGs, we can't seem to define SDGs. We've been struggling for the last 30 years. We've gone back and forth. Salim and you have passed a law. We're still redoing it, etc. We can't seem to do it. It's a tough thing to do, I agree. But it has been done in DIFC, it has been done in China. That's fact, it has been done. In one sense, it's been done in Hong Kong, in one sense. It has been done in Hong Kong in the sense that even though historically it came through that way, that's a struggle that's happening in Hong Kong right now. The Chinese government really wants to annex Hong Kong. But the power of Hong Kong for the last 40 years was independent of escape valve for China. It was a kind of a chartered city, so I think in that sense, right? So I think reconsider how hard do you want to be. That's my only thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just I have the same point that the basic idea is to how reform these institutions, and that the only way that they said it's very difficult to reform with the existing structure, to come up with a new structure, and maybe you can have a very innovative idea. So last point.
Yes, I think considering how hard we need to be in case of Paul Romer, I would say that the learning that we can get from his idea that rules matter in cities, and that idea that he has given to us that you experiment with these rules. To that extent, I think it's okay. But the way he explained it in a way that when he started describing the characteristics of these things, these were very rigid ones actually. So some of us can interpret that he didn't mean it, but he himself laid them out in a very rigid way. This should happen like this, like Guantanamo Bay and all these sort of things. He mentioned it very clearly. And in one TED talk, I think one interview that he was having with Ed Glazer actually at NYU, so I heard that on YouTube, that must be something there. So in the very way he used this word of exporting governance. So his idea was very clear actually. He was trying to import institutions, and he thinks there are some countries which have very good rules, but there are other countries who do not have good rules, and who do not have good rules, they cannot create good rules. And this is the same colonial mindset in a way that you need to have a white skin to create such good rules. So this is something that this is inherent in his idea. And I think that learning is great in a way that we need experimentation. China did experimentation in Shenzhen, in many other cities as well. So to that extent, it's fine that cities need to learn from Shenzhen, cities need to learn from DIFC, cities need to learn from other such models. But we need to come up with a system that is not as something that we are importing or exporting institutions. So I think he's very clear. We can interpret in different way, but he used this word even exporting institutions.
One small comment, please. Following up on Dr. Leem's defense of Roma. Roma spent about 18-19 months at the World Bank.
Yeah.
Had a very difficult time there, and then he resigned.
Yeah.
And he has a very interesting criticism about the World Bank. How they use data or not, or misuse data.
I followed all that time period when he was there. Even I met him during that time when he was chief economist. So that was difficult time.
Does that explain?
He wasn't fit actually.
Explains the ethos of the World Bank?
Yeah, this does actually.
Okay, thank you so much for giving us a very informative discussion, and there are a lot of questions for us to look into the new dimension of this charter city and what are the underlying factors that basically help us to reform our institutions and try to avoid this colonialism. Thank you so much, and all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.